Welcome to Learning with Lisa, Student Success Beyond Expectations podcast with Lisa Navarra, award-winning educator, consultant, behavior specialist, author, and parent.
Welcome to Student Success Beyond Expectations. Do you wonder how you can help your child or your student really believe in their ability to communicate with one another? Or are you looking to get your students to communicate and listen with one another on a deeper level rather than just surface? You're kind of looking out in the distance and not really processing what they're saying? Well, here we bring Ivy Meyers. She has a wealth of experience and passion for this area within speech and learning. She's certified as a speech and language pathologist. We can't wait to hear from you, Ivy.
Hi, how are you?
We're doing great. So I know that you have been so passionate with really building the skills within children to be able to communicate with one another. Can you talk to us about how important that is?
Sure. So communication just in general is the key to success, right? You need to be an effective communicator to let your feelings be known, to let your wants be known, and to be able to interact with people on just a basic level. So within my therapy room, I really put a focus on establishing those basic communication skills, eye contact, good listening, words of kindness, and just being able to express our needs and listen to our peers or friends.
When you say words of kindness, what does that mean? When you work with your students, do you teach them? Does it come out innately? How do you get to these words of kindness?
So it's really a little bit of both. But what I really try and teach in my therapy room is the compassion we have for each other, as well as just lifting somebody up and being able to expand our vocabulary and our social skills and our listening just to the most basic forms of language, so that you're showing that you care, right? By both verbal and nonverbal communication.
Do you find that students are open to it? Do you ever find resistance, or they just don't really understand what it is that you're trying to teach them, like through lack of experience maybe, or otherwise?
Yeah. So right off the bat, I always try and establish routines. We always start off just a little bit with a welcome. Tell me about your day. Tell me about your night last night. Are you happy about something? Are you upset about something? Which just, the goal is to build into just spontaneous conversation, as well as, being able to complete the tasks in therapy by forming our sentences, using our vocabulary, and taking these learned skills from therapeutic activities to spontaneous conversational speech.
So when you say spontaneous speech, can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Conversation, being able to comment effectively on your surroundings, being able to engage in a discussion regarding a specific topic while staying on the area of discussion, while being able to respond effectively to questions, and just being able to engage naturally. Communication is a very natural process. There shouldn't be that many barriers that prevent us from really being able to say what's on our mind and being able to understand what our listeners are saying. At times, we need therapy to help us overcome some of those barriers.
And do you have a favorite go-to to help with those barriers?
I have a ton of therapy materials, right?
Share.
Whether they're games, whether they're computer programs, whether they are worksheets. I like to give a lot of worksheets out because we have a speech and language notebook, and I put the worksheets in the book for home practice, and that we can look back and say, oh, remember this, or this was a great activity, and this was a lot of fun, and so forth and so on.
Now, you mentioned home practice. Do you have regular communication with the parents of your students, and how does that look like?
So I have a communication notebook where I try, most of my students are twice a week sessions. Some are once a week. I usually try at least once a week to add some materials into their notebooks. Their notebooks are supposed to go home with them on speech days for practice. And like everything else, there are days I give just a little bit of homework. I'm not a big homework believer for speech, but I'll give just a few questions, and sometimes they'll be done, and sometimes other obligations come in the way, but I try to really reinforce practice at home.
And do you find that the parents come to you during maybe meet the teacher or with concerns, and then after a while they say, I see some improvements, and what does that look like?
So I have had a bunch of parents that have come to me. We discuss, the goals that are on the IEP and how we're tackling these goals and how we're going forward with these goals. And I always feel it's very important to have like a progression in your therapy. So if it was an articulation student, first you're starting with single words, and then you're going to phrases, and then you're going to sentences, and then you're going to connected speech, so that there's a progression and a hierarchy of knowing where your skills are. Same thing with language. If it's a child with expressive or receptive language delay, and we're working on questions, we're starting with basic who, what, where, and then we're going into the higher level, more advanced when, why, how. That requires a little bit more inferencing, as well as processing, as well as just higher level language to respond to those questions.
How does a teacher know when there's a real language delay and when to be concerned?
So a lot of times my teachers will approach me with difficulty reading a text, difficulty comprehending what's in the text, difficulty formulating sentences. That would be the language portion. For speech or stuttering or disfluency, they're having a hard time actually communicating the message, and the teacher is having a hard time understanding what they're trying to say, or they're seeing some struggle and tension with a fluency student, a student with fluency concerns. So that will automatically, raise that red flag to hopefully, pull the student for a screening or a discussion to get a heads up on where their language and speech falls.
I believe that and tell me if you agree or not, that when there's an articulation or a fluency delay, it's easier for educators to be able to identify that. Do you find that it's harder to identify when a child is having difficulty with comprehension that's related to a speech need?
Well, so when you have a child who stutters or a child with an articulation deficit where it is so pronounced, it's evident in their speech, so it is more apparent because you're hearing it, as opposed to really, if you have a child with comprehension, some difficulties, sometimes it can, if they're reading the text and then they're having a hard time responding to the question, sometimes we naturally, as teachers, will make the question a little bit easier or rephrase it. So you might not get a good grasp on where exactly that comprehension disorder lies.
Right. So that's something that, as us educators, as well as parents listening, to really keep that in mind, as the comprehension piece can be indicative of as a skill really in speech. Yes. And to really, keep that on the radar, because it's not always the way we sound.
Absolutely. Literacy skills, comprehension, they really go hand in hand with speech and language processing disorders.
Is that why so many children who are found to have a learning disability also have speech?
It could be. Absolutely. It's definitely connected.
Fantastic. And you also said inferencing. Now, I know as a classroom teacher, I know as a behavior specialist, inferencing for so many different reasons seems to be very difficult to teach as a higher order thinking skill. Tell us and just talk to us about what inferencing looks like in your therapy room, and maybe some strategies and suggestions that you might have.
Absolutely. So with my inferencing, right, you have to take your background knowledge and what you know already and really apply it to the question that's being asked. So I usually start off with tasks that will zone in on things or activities that children may be familiar with. So, for example, I'm looking out the window today. The sky looks dark. I'm going to put on my raincoat. What might happen? Just basic level inferencing. And then we take that to the next level by reading passages or paragraphs or short stories and predicting what will happen next and what comes next and what's a great idea that might follow a logical order while we're working on those WH questions.
And that's also part of organizing your thoughts too.
Absolutely. Executive functioning, putting it, there you go.
Yes, I was just going to say, you go. All
that
right.
executive
Talk to us.
functioning, that higher level language
Yes.
that really, and as the students go through the grades, right, first, second, third, as they become in the more intermediate grades, then we're working more on the inferencing skills and the higher levels and the idioms and the figurative language.
Yes. I know kids get so excited when they finally get something that they feel like, I got it finally. Light bulb goes on, I've got the skill. And because you're going around in the classrooms and in the hallways, you probably see a lot of your kids walking around, right?
Absolutely.
Do
And
they
communication
stop you?
all day long?
Yeah, yeah.
Where are you going? How's your day? We're like in the middle of the hall. Absolutely.
Communication.
I'm speaking and talking all day long.
And do they stop you during those times and say, I've got it? Do they like share their success?
I mean, what'll be funny is like, I have, if we're working on idioms, I'll see sometimes a student in the hall and they'll be like, Mrs. Myers, it's raining cats and dogs outside, and they'll show me that they're using some of their learned skills. And
Yes.
and my younger students, it's just like what we started off initially, that basic communication, greeting somebody, saying hello. If I give out breakfast sometimes in the morning, so the requesting, the formulating the longer sentences or the longer questions so that they're using their language to get what they want.
Well, they're very fortunate to have you because you're very, very enthusiastic about what it is that you do. We could tell.
Yes, I love my job and my profession, for sure.
Well, you're making a difference. And not only are you making a difference in your speech room for those particular areas, but you've extended yourself. You've extended yourself in social groups, right?
Yes. So I run a before school social skills group where we work on a lot of what we have already discussed: sharing emotions, sharing feelings, turn taking, kindness, interacting with others, learning how to use our language effectively, greeting somebody, sharing if we're not so happy about something or if we're upset about something, and also sharing when we're thrilled or ecstatic or excited about something, and really using our language in that social context.
Are they excited to come? Do you have a lot of students who want to join up for this?
Yes. So especially in the earlier grades, speech is very popular. Everybody wants to come to speech.
I went to speech. I loved it. I got my pretzel rods as a reward for my R's, I think.
Yes, and then as they get older, it might not be as appealing, but I definitely have my social skills group is geared towards the younger kids, and I definitely have a bunch that would like to participate.
What made you get into speech and language pathology?
So very interesting, even though it has nothing to do with students. Both my grandfathers, one had cancer in his throat, of his larynx, and one had a stroke and was unable to communicate. So at approximately the same time, both of them were being seen by speech-language pathologists. And I just thought it was an amazing field to go into.
Wow. So it's from your experience. There's a lot of talk about transitions, a lot of talk about careers, and really preparing students for that. And do you ever talk about your story to your students?
I have, especially with some of my older students. I don't get into the real knit and grit of,
Sure.
oh, well, my grandfather had a stroke and this,
Right.
but just that it affected my family, and I saw a speech pathologist was able to help. And I just often talk about my career and how versatile it is, right? You can do private practice, and you can work in a school, and you can work at an independent contractor, and you could do only evaluations or therapy or social skills groups, and all the different populations of students you can work with as well, and adults too.
Absolutely. So you're providing therapy, you're providing enrichment and inspiration. All these things all wrapped
I love
up,
that.
Myers.
Therapy, enrichment, inspiration. I'm writing that on my door.
Yes, DTEI.
Yes.
Something we all really need to engage in, and all comes down to communication.
Absolutely.
Think about it, right?
Yeah. Being an effective communicator is going to help with every aspect, with job skills, with work skills, with school skills, with interpersonal abilities.
Tell us about how educators and other related service providers can collaboratively work with the speech and language pathologist in their school.
I really have such nice relationships with all my teachers. And what we do is I try and take what the teachers have to tell me about the students, zoning in on the individual needs and bringing that into my therapy room and using some strategies, whether it be a deep breathing for someone who has fluency concerns or anxiety, or relaxation exercises, and bring them into my therapy room. And then again, just try to teach some of the teachers, or try to work with some of the teachers, strategies that I use that might help with responding to questions, producing sounds. And it really is such nice, when I have a student who has trouble with the sound and they get it, and I show it to the teacher and then they practice it during their activities, it really works, so nicely hand in hand.
If there was one skill or strategy, even concept that you wish everyone who worked or parented a child could do, could know, what would that be?
It's really just being that active listener.
Active listening.
Active listening and really paying attention, maintaining that eye contact, and just showing that you're an effective communicator.
So slowing down, sometimes we all need to slow down to be able to do that, right?
Yeah. Nobody wants to speak to somebody who's not giving them attention or looking at them and showing them eye contact. Shows what you have to say is important to me and I'm listening.
Yeah, because you're important. If you could see yourself doing something in a few years from now, speech related, what would it be? Would it be the same what you're doing now, or do you have a want or a need that you'd like to fulfill?
I mean, I love what I'm doing now. I'm really very content and very happy. Every year I try, and especially with COVID, to bring a little bit more SEL into the speech language therapy room, so that it's not just, here's a worksheet, let's do it, and a drill and an activity, that it really is zoning in on those social emotional skills.
Can you give us an example? Does any come to mind?
Sure. So, every year I order new materials. So this year, a lot of my materials have been based on a game. What would you do? What do you think? Where we're zoning in on school-based school-based problems that come about, and it's in a game situation. WH questions that really reflect on a student's background, or a student, tell me about yourself, what makes you happy, where do you like to go, so that I'm finding out more about my students to use that learning and that education to plan my therapy materials.
And they're excited to share, so let's talk more.
They are. They love they love coming in and telling me about their weekend, about their days, for sure.
That's really, it's fun. It sounds like you have a really fun job when it comes down to just working right with the kids.
It's not work.
It's not work.
I miss the paperwork, but it's
of course.
Work. It is a lot of fun.
Yes, the whole paperwork we could probably do a whole nother podcast episode on.
Absolutely.
Well, Ivy, if there's anything else, I also wanted to ask you about visuals.
Okay.
How important are visuals in your practice?
So really any cues, whether it be visual, auditory, they are very important, right? Because they're helping the students to understand the materials and to be able to use picture cues and be able to use visual planners and visual ideas to understand what's being presented to them.
So if there was anything else that we would talk about tonight, or any advice that you would like to give to our listeners, what would that be?
Just keep talking. Ask about their day. Ask about their work. Ask about how their bus ride was. Just keep talking, and those lines of communication open. It's so important. It builds vocabulary. It builds listening skills. It builds interpersonal skills. It's just all about effective communication.
Ivy Meyers, speech-language pathologist, thank you for providing therapy, enrichment, and inspiration to those who you serve. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Student Success Beyond Expectations podcast, where school leaders, educators, and parents meet on behalf of children who struggle with learning.